Good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michael, and I'm actually very excited to actually be moderating this session. As a budding maritime archaeologist, I have so much to learn from these three individuals. So, without further ado, let me introduce to you our first speaker, Dr. Iván Valdez. Okay, he is a research fellow of the Universidad Nacional Autonóma de Mexico, and he specializes in the history of Spanish naval shipbuilding in Europe, America, and Asia during the Age of Sail. He's the author of Poder Naval y Modernización de Estado Policia de Sorry, I'm butchering the Spanish. I'm really trying my best. Duolingo is not doing very well on me yesterday night. Yeah, but he was actually working on a book on naval corps and as well as construction. And he's also the associate editor of the International Journal of Maritime History and Revisita de Historia Naval. He's also the founder and coordinator of the Philippines-Mexico Studies Program at UNAM and the Red Filipina Network. So without any much delay, and sorry for butchering Espanol, okay, I would like to invite Dr. Iván to actually proceed to the podium to actually share his presentation on the construction of Manila Galleons from the 16th to 18th century. Dr. Iván, please. Thank you.
How does it work? Oh. How do I go back? The red one. Okay. Yes. Shall we go to the beginning? Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to express my gratitude to Mr. Clement On, to the Museum of Asian Civilisations, to His Excellency the Ambassador of Mexico in Singapore, Agustin Garcia Lopez Loaesa, to my colleagues in this panel, and of course to all of you for your presence. My objective, not only here, but I must say in life, is to understand the functioning of the Hispanic shipbuilding industry in the Pacific, especially in the Philippines, in the early modern age. This includes, of course, Spanish America, where it started in the 16th century, and the wider context of Southeast Asia, where it migrated or attempted to migrate in the 17th and 18th centuries. This is, of course, a history of globalization, as has been mentioned here, or to put it differently, a history of the infrastructures that made globalization possible in the first place. There are competing narratives on globalization. We have Smithian Weberian interpretation, basically developed after The Wealth of Nations, published by Adam Smith in 1776, and then developed by the German economist and sociologist Max Weber, which basically points out a Protestant or North Atlantic globalization led by the Protestant nations, but especially by Great Britain, and it takes as its leading marker the balance of prices in different world regions. In this view, the globalization would have started after the end of the Napoleonic Wars in the early 19th century, and it is therefore mainly a British phenomenon. There's also, of course, the narrative of the Silk Route, the Sinocentric version of globalization theory, which stresses the exchange of luxury products between different world regions. And of course, this is a very old interpretation of globalization, as attested by the Greek geographer Strabo, the Roman natural philosopher Pliny the Elder, or the anonymous writer of the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea. But this interpretation, of course, lacks the presence of America. So it is therefore incomplete. And now there is a Hispanocentric, a more recent Hispanocentric reading of globalization, in which direct trade between the economies of Europe and Asia through Spanish American is seen as the starting point of globalization. Now, within this reading, there are also two competing interpretations. A Eurocentric one, which underlies the role of the Spanish monarchy in creating and shaping the Trans-Pacific route, and a Mexican version, which stresses the relative autonomy of the Mexican and Philippine interests that sustained the route for almost 300 years. But they all have one common factor, that is trade as the main indicator of economic, social, and cultural integration. And yet, the link between the economies of Europe and Asia through Spanish America only became permanent when the shipbuilding industry was transferred from Mexico, from New Spain, to the Philippines, that is after 1583. Clearly, the shipbuilding industry not only predates commerce, but actually made it possible. So we're talking about something that was there before and actually made globalization possible. It was a precondition. This could make a strong case for the argument of a Hispanic globalization, and it will please many people in Mexico, I'm sure. But let's focus on the question of what can we learn if we try to see this process, globalization, not from the perspective of trade, but from the perspective of the shipbuilding industry. The short answer is, by focusing on ships and shipbuilding, we get a broader and more complex picture of social actors, productive activities, organizational processes, and so on. So, together with the capitalists, the administrators, and the consumers from the upper levels of society, we also get a wide array of middle classes, of specialized workers, shipwrights, craftsmen, technicians from different types. But we also get to see a wider social strata of maritime proletarians, workers, woodcutting workers, shipyard workers, sailors, a much broader social and organizational context. In concrete terms, this would mean, of course, the Basques, the maritime populations of Guipúzcoa and Santander. In the 16th century, this was called Cantabria, the Cantabrian regions, Vizcaya, Guipúzcoa, and Santander. Also of Spanish America, the mixed race free men of La Habana, Cartagena de Indias, Acapulco, Guayaquil, El Callao, El Realejo, and many other ports in different regions of the continent. And in the Philippines, this meant also the expatriates from the Chinese regions of Fujian and Guangdong, who worked in the shipyards in the Philippine shipyards at different levels. And crucially, perhaps, the indigenous populations of Spanish America and the Philippines, who provided labor for woodcutting and shipyard operations, and some of the essential manufactures needed for the actual construction of the ships. They also worked as semi-forced labor together with permanent slaves brought from India and from Africa. In all, the indigenous populations of Spanish America and the Philippines held a conflictive interaction with the interests of global trade. And in fact, as we know, the Philippines was almost in a state of constant rebellion throughout the years in which the Manila-Acapulco galleon system functioned. And together with all that, we have the administrative infrastructure of the modern state working to regulate all these different layers of labor and capital and technology. So the second question is, how do we get to know the ships? If we agree that the ships are important and they can give us a different perspective of the history of globalization, then how we get to know them? And well, the answer is by confronting the information, the abstract information we get from archive sources with the material vestiges brought forward by maritime archaeology. Concretely, the most basic parameter is the actual construction of the hull of the ships, its basic dimensions: keel, beam, length, floor, and also the relation between these proportions, the relation between keel and beam, keel and length and beam, etc., etc. But it also means, besides these rather abstract concepts, the mechanical solutions found by shipyards, by shipwrights, to hold together the structural elements of the hull: the keels on the stern post, the floor timbers, or simply called the floors, the futtocks, the beams, and strakes, and so on. Of course, this list could be extended almost indefinitely. However, the actual relation between the abstract knowledge we get from paper sources, from documents, and the concrete knowledge we get from underwater archaeology is very difficult to establish. It's very, very difficult to actually trace the link between one type of knowledge and the other. And that's why the institutions dedicated to maritime archaeology have compiled very complete lists of the basic information about different ships, compiled from the archives in different countries. And from all this, a standard has been set, a convention about the main characteristics of a so-called Iberian Atlantic tradition, which encompasses, of course, the shipbuilding industries of Portugal and peninsular Spain, or European Spain. And well, here you have the basic list. There are 10 or 11 elements that are being always pointed out, and they basically are taken from the information given by one concrete shipwreck, the wreck of the whaler San Juan, which sank off the coasts of Terranova in Newfoundland, Red Bay in 1565, and which was found in 1978, and it became the main reference to define the technical characteristics of the Iberian Atlantic tradition. Now, with the years, other shipwrecks have been found, and the existence of a cultural cluster within the Iberian Atlantic tradition has been also conventionally defined. And this is the Biscayan or Basque tradition, which represents a model of cultural hybridization between different regions of the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. Now, apart from these two traditions, we also have a Spanish, properly called Spanish tradition, basically derived from the intervention of the Spanish crown over the productive processes of the shipbuilding industries. But let's just have a look at the basic characteristics of the Biscayan tradition. So basically, the most important thing here is the composition of the so-called frames or bends of the ship, the ribs, which are not held together in single structure composed of floor timbers and futtocks to form a double layered structure for each rib. This is a a system that became that came to be in the second half of the 18th century. Before that, we had this system of overlaying floor timbers and futtocks, which was called in Spanish ligazones or futtock, superpuestas, superposed futtocks. And basically, it left empty spaces above the floor timbers and superposed the futtocks one on top of the other, creating a very solid and flexible structure. So basically, this is the main constructional characteristic of the Iberian Biscayan or Basque shipbuilding tradition. And this is important for us because the Basque shipwrights dominated the production in the shipyards, not only of peninsular Spain, ships that were produced for the Indies run, but also the production of ships in the Caribbean, the Spanish Pacific, in the coast of Spanish America, and in the Philippines as well. That's why the Biscayan tradition is important. One distinguishing feature in the 16th century is that there were only 3 pre-drawn frames or bends. The main bend in the middle, and then 2 balance frames or bends put forward and aft. And they were joined together by a flexible stripe of wood called bagara in Spanish, or reband in English, which actually traced the shapes of the rest of the hull and allowed the artisans to just carve the rest of the timbers according to that pattern. So it was very, very simple in principle to follow. So, well, that is the Basque Biscayan shipbuilding tradition. Now, I just mentioned that the Spanish tradition evolved from the Basque tradition, basically by the intervention of the crown of the state over shipbuilding operations. Basically, the crown forced the private entrepreneurs of shipbuilding into following certain patterns defined by her own shipwrights in order to obtain certain characteristics that made the ships more efficient, not only for mercantile operations, but also for warfare. And another very important thing, to cross the Sanlúcar Bar, the shallow fluvial entrance to the Guadalquivir River, where the base of the Indies run was set since 1503, La Barra de Sanlúcar. So this could be called the Spanish tradition, basically a modification of the Biscayan tradition led by the state and its agents in the shipyards of the Spanish Empire. This is a painting of a galleon built by the Basque shipwright Antonio de Gastañeta in Colindres, Santander in 1687. And it is very important because it shows that the Biscayan tradition evolved over time to include more pre-drawn bends. So this made the construction of the ship more predictable than in the previous system. Basically, more predefined frames appeared. But as you can see at the bottom, the system of superposed futtocks continued to exist. It was still there at the end of the 17th century. Here you have another view of the same model built by Perona in 2004. This is the model that you can see at the Naval Museum in Madrid. So many of you will recognize it. The Spanish tradition continued with the rise of Gastañeta as the chief shipbuilder in the Spanish Empire, which led to the publication of his Proporciones de las Medidas Más Esenciales between 1720 and 1722. So this became the official shipbuilding regulation for the whole of the Spanish Empire after the end of the War of the Spanish Succession. That is in the 1720s. After Gastañeta died in 1728, the Spanish tradition changed very, very rapidly because he was replaced in directing shipbuilding operations by a new generation of French shipbuilders led by Ciprián Autran. That's his Spanish name. He basically became general director the director of shipbuilding for the whole of the empire. And he introduced the new French method in use since the late 17th century of building the hull from pre-drawn double futtock frames. This is, well, you will see it in a moment. It's very easy to recognize, and it makes, oh, I'm going backwards, sorry. Ah, it's the other, sorry, I just confused the buttons. Well, yes, the French system of pre-built and pre-drawn frames superseded the Basque shipbuilding tradition from 1728 onwards. And this was later on modified in different periods because after 1748, the generation of French shipbuilders was superseded by a different generation of English shipbuilders brought to Spain by Jorge Juan in 1748 and who started directing production in the shipyards of the empire. And this also used double futtock frames, but with the novelty of using not iron nails to fasten the components, but rather trunnions, that is, wooden pins, which lasted for a few years, some 20 years, until they were on their turn replaced by another generation of French builders, led by Jean-François Gautier in 1765, who trained a new generation of Spanish builders. And this system basically lasted until the end of the Age of Sail. I put 1817 as the conventional date because that's when the Spanish engineer that was formed under Gautier died, Joseph Romero González de Landa, but in fact this is a tradition that lasted until the end of the Age of Sail. So basically there are very easy to identify constructional periods that has led the work of underwater archaeologists in the Atlantic and in the Caribbean. And what about the Philippines? The Philippines pose, understanding the shipbuilding industry in the Philippines poses difficult and very particular problems, very specific problems, because the archive documentation, although abundant, lacks detail on shipbuilding operations and on the technical characteristics of the ships. This is a mystery which perhaps can be explained, but it's an interesting phenomenon. When one looks at the documentation produced by shipbuilding operations in Europe and America, one finds an extreme level of detail. Each contract that was signed between the Crown and the particular detailed shipbuilding components down to the last nail, without exaggeration, down to the last nail, to the number of workers that were needed, the periods in which components would be assembled, the final costs of everything, and we lack all that in the documentation produced by shipbuilding operations in the Philippines. They are rather laconic and scarce. But we have 3 shipbuilding treatises, and this is already a lot. Just by comparison, in the case of Atlantic or Atlantic Spain, the Atlantic Hispanic world, we have dozens of shipbuilding treatises. In the case of the Philippines, we only have these 3. Diego Garcia de Palacio, published in Mexico in 1587. Castañeta, because it was proclaimed in the Philippines in 1723. This is a beautiful transcription of the Castañeta legislation made for the Philippine shipyards. This is how it was distributed in the Philippine shipyards. And this is the table of measurements and scantlings of the original published Castañeta legislation and the Philippine version copied by hand. So it was transferred to the Philippines in 1723. if we compare these two treatises, Diego García Palacio from 1587 to Joseph González Cabrera Bueno, which is the last treatise published in the Philippines in 1734, we find that the Biscayan shipbuilding tradition of building by superposed futogs was still alive in the Philippines when it was being abandoned in Atlantic and American shipyards. So this means that this system was still in use in those years. It was more complex. There were more pre-drawn bends, but the basic characteristics of the system were still there. The persistence of this tradition in the Philippines is attested also by the wreck of the San Diego Galleon, which sank in 1600 after a battle led by Antonio de Morga, the author of the Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas. And as we know, it contains a keel, the remnants of 51 floor timbers, and a stern post, which give us a very good idea of how the hull was built, although not its precise dimensions, but it clearly points out the technology transfer from the Iberian Atlantic and Biscayan tradition to the Pacific. As far as I know, we don't have any information from underwater archaeology from wrecks from different periods. I understand that a few beams were found from the wreck in Oregon, the Beeswax wreck. Also that a keel from the Nuestra Señora de la Vida wreck has also been found, but we don't have any other information from underwater archaeology. And this highlights the importance of these treatises to understand the evolution of the industry. Now, we know for sure that some French shipbuilders were active in the Cavite shipyard in the Philippines between the 1740s and the 1750s. And this was also the period in which the French system was being abandoned in favor of the English one in the Atlantic shipyards. So maybe this gives us some hints into what could be found in the future. But also, as we know, the Spanish Navy started intervening the Manila Acapulco Galleon trade route directly from 1765 onwards. And from 1770, they started intervening the Cavite shipyard, and they set up a new shipyard at the Pasig River, San Fernando del Pasig, which in 1771 started launching the first galleons built directly by the Spanish Navy. One can only speculate what kind of construction will be there if one of these ships is ever found, but most likely it will present the double futogged frames of mid-18th century Spanish construction. What other questions can we ask to this dialogue between archaeology and history? Apart from the technical characteristics of the hull, we also have the auxiliary disciplines of dendrochronology and dendroprovenance. Dendroprovenance, basically, the disciplines that allow us to date timber vestiges and, of course, their place of origin. And this gives us a wide array of information about the actual functioning of these industries. And let me put forward another hypothesis. The quality of Philippine timbers for shipbuilding was praised during the 16th century since the work of Pigafetta and many other observers, for example, Padre Francisco Alcine, who all pointed out the high qualities of Philippine shipbuilding timbers And yet, from the decade of 1610, second decade of the 17th century, we find in official documentation produced in Manila and Philippine shipyards a current of negative opinions regarding the quality of shipbuilding timbers from the Philippines. Basically, timbers are criticized and they are blamed for the many accidents that happened on the route. They were also blamed for the brief operational life of the galleons. And well, there was a derisive opinions for several decades. And significantly, it was precisely during those dates that the first shipbuilding operations by contract in Cambodia, later on Siam, and in India actually took place. So there was a strong current of opinion amongst the officers of the shipbuilding industry in the Philippines to actually cancel the industry once and for all and to transfer it to those countries. And yet, during the 19th century, we get again a positive view of the Philippine timbers brought forward by officers and the Spanish Navy, and above all, of course, by the botanical works of El Padre Blanco, Father Blanco. So clearly, it doesn't seem like the woods changed their qualities in 200 years, but rather that other causes pushed this change of views about the qualities of the Philippine shipbuilding timbers. And well, my opinion is that this could be related to the instability of the shipbuilding industries. We know that there was a state of almost constant rebellion in the Philippines, brought about by the woodcutting campaigns, by the semi-forced labor utilized for the polos, for the purchase without payment of shipbuilding manufacturers from the indigenous populations of the Philippines. And this almost constant state of warfare might have had something to do with the idea of canceling the shipbuilding industries in the Philippines and subcontracting these operations in India, Cambodia, and Siam. Also, there's the rising costs of galleon production. For example, whereas in 1583, to build a galleon costed 4,000 pesos, in 1631, was recorded at 98,000 pesos, and in 1750, it came to almost 200,000 pesos. Maybe all these factors are related, but in the case that wrecks of these periods are found, it would be extremely interesting to know the provenance and the date of shipbuilding timbers. Another factor, well, we don't have time to explain that, is the pressure of the crown over the technical characteristics of the ships. Basically, the crown wanted to tax trade more efficiently, and this passed through a tighter control over the technical characteristics of the ships. And well, we now come to the point of cultural hybridization, which has been seen as a factor in the Iberian Biscayan tradition and which could have operated in the Philippine shipbuilding industries as well. But well, maybe we can discuss that in the questions and answers, because I see that I might have exceeded my time. So, okay, well, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Iván.
Yeah, thank you everyone for your kind attention. Because we are running a little bit close to the next segment of our activity, which is tea break. So perhaps I can invite everyone to perhaps get some tea break. And if you have any questions, it would be nice to actually catch Dr. Iván during the tea break and ask him questions related to the ship construction. I mean, for me, I'm actually having a ton of questions that I would like to ask him, but I will actually use that during the tea break. Yeah, so ladies and gentlemen, kindly you can actually proceed out. Hi, good afternoon. Yeah, because I think lunch is coming soon, but we will actually be enjoying more content about archaeology, maritime archaeology, specifically in Mexico as well as the Philippines. So as we are getting settled down, I'd like to also take this chance to actually introduce Dr. Roberto Junco. Okay, he is the director of the Underwater Archaeology Office at the Instituto Nacional de Antropología y Historia. I have done a little bit of Duolingo, but I think it still failed horribly. I'm so sorry. He has directed excavations at the Nevado de Toluca volcano, the Manila Galleon wreck in Baja California, and the port of Acapulco. His research focuses on the study of Chinese porcelain, the archaeology of Manila galleons, and maritime navigation during the colonial period. So, without further delays, I would like to invite Dr. Roberto Junco to come on to the stage to present his presentation on the research on Manila Galleon trade. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. It is really a privilege and an honor for me to be here among you to tell you a little bit about the archaeology that we've been doing in Mexico for the past 20 years related to the Manila Galleons. It's also very meaningful for me to be in this museum, since some of the objects that we brought from our office is the first time that they're exhibited to the public. So that's also something wonderful for me to have them for the first time in a museum for everybody to enjoy. So, as Bobby and I were saying just a minute ago, we have big shoes to fill after Dr. Ocampo and Dr. Valdez. But anyways, as you already saw in the exhibit, if you saw it, or maybe you've heard from the topic before, this is a very interesting story that developed in the 16th century, and I would like to call it a love story. This is truly a love story between two regions, between two cultures across the Pacific Ocean. So on one side, we have the port of Acapulco, which was a little bit, we could say, in the center of a complex network of New Spain and the Spanish America, connecting with South America through Panama all the way to Peru, and inland towards the territories of New Spain and on to Veracruz and to Spain. And in the other side, we have Manila, also in the center of a very complex trade route that for centuries had operated before even the Europeans arrived, connecting Japan, China, Southeast Asia, India. So these two centers, apparently so far away, 13,000 kilometers away, were sharing this kind of energy, central energy in this commerce that developed for 250 years. So in those 250 years, there were a lot of dynamics, as you will be able to appreciate in some of the conferences that you'll be hearing today and tomorrow, and as you'll see in the exhibit, topics of influence, topics of desirable items, topics of technologies to overcome these crossings, etc. In Mexico, we could argue that the first archaeological project that really took care of the topic of the Manila Galleon, some previous excavations, of course, unearthed porcelains in central Mexico, Huejotzingo, and Mexico City, but little had been done really into the topic of Manila Galleon archaeology. But in 1999, the first project devoted to the Manila Galleon archaeology was developed by a man, Edward van der Porten, whom some of you might know. And it has a really interesting story. There was a wonderful catalog that a very savant man, Kuwayama, published in the Los Angeles Museum. And it said, it portrayed some porcelains from an unpublished site of the coast of Baja California. So Ed van der Porten, with his keen eye, he said, this is very interesting, what's going on here? So he actually contacted Kuwayama, who contacted the beachcombers that had picked up these shards and decided to organize an expedition. So he contacted the Instituto Nacional de Antropología Historia, my former boss, Pilar Luna, and they headed down to Baja California, to this very remote place, lonely beach, full of different objects that are carried by the currents from California and everywhere. It's just like a very strange place in the coast, very remote. And the site was discovered. No? This is a very long site. It's about 12 kilometers in length, where you can find the different pieces of the cargo of a shipwreck that has to be been dated to the 1570s. So we're talking about one of the early galleons that found its way to the coast. Probably all the sailors were dead by then. The currents just took the ship and it crashed into this place. Over the years, throughout these 11 kilometers, we've done very different methodological work to locate the main part of the shipwreck. So with magnetometry, for example, we know now at sea where are some of the magnetic anomalies, probably the anchors of the ship, maybe cannons, something like that. The problem is that this is right where the surf hits, and it's been almost impossible to get 3-4 meters below the sand, below the water. We would need like to develop something very special to actually get to this anomaly. But on the beach, 200 meters away, over 11 kilometers, we find traces of the cargo of the ship. So this is porcelains, ceramics, Spanish ceramics, Chinese ceramics, also wax blocks, and these have been instrumental into figuring out the process of the wreck, because some of these blocks are eaten by Teredo navalis and other born animals, and we know more or less how much they can bore the wood, for example, or the wax. We can determine that the ship was hit the beach and was there for 2-3 years before it actually just broke up. And after 400 years, it's been just going in these 11 kilometers. So doing also work with metal detectors and excavating these places where we find things, we've been able to develop, understand very precisely where's more or less the main concentration of artifacts. And among these artifacts, we found things like coins, lead pieces, cloisonné, and we were talking about this yesterday. It's the first time that we know that the cloisonné was part of these cargoes. In documents you don't find it, and also archaeologically, it's the first time that we find it. So some of these cloisonnés coming in the 1570s to the Americas, a bronze lion that's one of the iconic pieces, first time in exhibit anywhere. And so all these different objects that tell us about the trading objects that were being carried across the Pacific in that early period. Further work now continues, looking, for example, at the lead sheeting of the ship, which informs us also about the ship construction, some of the instruments, finding out with the lead isotope analysis, for example, the provenance of the lead used in these lead sheets, and now we know that could be Central America and north of Mexico, where they were producing this thing to make the hull of the ship last longer. No? Ed van der Porten, before he passed away, he was able to publish a really nice book called The Ghost Galleon, and that book was published by Texas A&M University Press, and details the 20 years almost that he was able to lead that project with us. At this point, we're producing the catalog of the work that he did on the porcelain. He did see it before he died, and he loved it. We just haven't had the resources yet to do it, but I hope this year we'll be able to have it out. And it's going to be a fantastic book about the different types of the porcelains from the galleon. So that was kind of the only work that we've been able to produce about a Manila Galleon itself. But the topic, of course, it's a love story, no? As I said, it's a love story between the people back then, exchanging these things, and of course, us, the archaeologists that love the Manila Galleons. And so we started looking at other aspects of this trade route that could be archaeologically found in Mexico. So for my master's thesis in 2004 or 5, I went to the state of Guerrero, where my teacher had told me that many years ago had seen porcelain shards near the beach. So I was, oh my God, we have another Manila Galleon somewhere in Mexico. Unfortunately, it was not the case, but it was very fortunate in the sense that we found some dynamics that are not represented also in documents or in historic books. Along the beach, we picked up a nice collection of Chinese porcelains, and along that collection of porcelain, we also found some mayolicas. And these mayolicas back in that time were not known where they had been made. We only knew that they had been very much active in the 16th and half of the 17th century by the archaeologist Lister, a great archaeologist. So we knew that it was 16th to 17th century, but we didn't know the site where these had been produced. So we did some analysis, Ronald Bishop, we did some instrumental neutron activation analysis, and picked up samples of clays throughout Mexico, finding that this type, Romitas graphito, had been produced in the state of Michoacan, very concretely in the lake region, a very rich and interesting region in Mexico, and that connects through a river to a place very close where these were found in the sea. So we were able to reconstruct that this porcelain cargo was going through this river all the way to Michoacan. In Michoacan, we further found Chinese porcelain in some of the historic homes. So we were able to reconstruct these trading patterns that are not that were not legal or were not recorded, because they were talking about most probable contraband stuff. And then after doing my thesis on that, I started seeing part of the galleon materiality everywhere in Mexico. No? So for example, this is inside of a convent in Oaxaca, and where you put the holy water. I just, for some reason, took a peek and found that there was a Chinese plate in there. No? So you start seeing all these things. Once you start looking, you start seeing these things everywhere. And so we started doing work such as finding all the archaeological reports in Mexico where Chinese porcelain had been reported by the archaeologists. And in the most strange and remote places, we found that Chinese porcelain was being reported. So we started doing these studies of the distribution of the objects. And of course, we set our eyes on different ports that had been significant in the Pacific coast. For example, San Blas. San Blas is a port in the Pacific that became, in the 18th century, quite well known as a maritime department during the Bourbon reign. So they organized this port as the main place to stop the pirates coming into the Pacific, to explore Northern America. So, for example, in Alaska, you have Point Valdez. No? Well, that's from the expeditions that departed San Blas, and to basically protect also the galleon. No? But we know that some of the galleons actually passed through San Blas in the 18th century. But we went there to see. So we started doing our field work and started recording Chinese porcelain shards. And to our surprise, we started finding that there were 16th century Chinese porcelain shards. So we began to understand that San Blas was not only an 18th century port, but that actually had been part in some way of the commercial route of the Manila Galleon from the 16th century. So this materiality talks to us about these things and widens our horizon in regard to that. No? 1768 is when San Blas becomes a naval department and a shipyard also to repair the ships along the Pacific. We started also to make a lot of noise about the Manila Galleon, developing also methodological ideas of what could an archaeology of Manila Galleons could encompass, different things. And for example, this is an interesting thing where we in Facebook found that a man was selling what appeared to be Chinese ceramics. No? So we contacted him, we went all the way to Baja California to follow that lead. He ended up giving it to the Institute, because we did it the nice way. We could also have like cuff him, but no, come on, cooperate with us. Now this piece is in a museum. So little by little, we started finding different things, different places where these material remains are present in Mexico. And of course, if we wanted to do an archaeology of Manila Galleons, we had to go to Acapulco because Acapulco was in the center of this, no? And luckily enough, for our, they were doing some repair work at the Fort San Diego in Acapulco, and while they were doing this electric cable thing, they stumbled upon porcelain. And I want to stress that before that, in the history of Acapulco, the archaeologists had never reported or found any porcelain shard, which is kind of strange and weird, but it is like that. So that gave us the opportunity, and next day we were in Acapulco doing our small excavation with Dr. Rubén Manzanilla, one of my mentors, and wow, we recuperated all of a sudden a whole bunch of very interesting things pertaining to the Manila Galleon. And that gave us the excuse to propose to the Consejo de Arqueología an archaeological project specifically designed to study Acapulco. Next year, again, very luckily enough, the government started doing the construction of a water pipe and some electricity things in downtown Acapulco. And to our surprise, once we started going there and going through the earth and joining the excavations, we amazed a collection of over 8,000 shards of Chinese porcelain. What was really interesting, one of the first things, is that in downtown Acapulco, the materials that we were finding pertain to the very early period of the route. So we have like very early 16th century stuff all the way to like the 1640s. And in the fort, mostly what we had was 18th and 19th century stuff. So these two differences. And what we ended up actually finding in downtown Acapulco was the area where the Manila Galleon Fair took place. So remember, when the galleon would come, all the materials were unloaded, and then all the mules, all the merchants from throughout Mexico would come and start bartering the silver for the Asian items. So this was probably the place where all the stuff that broke during the voyage was just thrown away, taking it out of the boxes and just selling the good stuff and all the broken stuff. So there was so much porcelain coming out of these excavations, and we were just a few archaeologists, and I will, my colleagues did not hear this, but we were giving Coke bottles to the workers to collect the porcelain for us, because it was just gonna happen so fast and this was not gonna stop. So we were like every day giving Coke bottles to the workers, and they were giving us the little shards of porcelain, so we could document where in what street were these things coming out, because this was a once in a lifetime chance to get to the lower parts of Acapulco. So amazing pieces came out of this work. For example, this early deer pattern dish, which you can actually see in the exhibit. And I say I'm so excited because this is the first time that these things are for the public to see in a museum. And so many just beautiful designs, and we're now working on this amazing catalog of the porcelain of Acapulco. And just great surprises are showing up. This plate, and I might be wrong in my interpretation, and I know some of the colleagues here are, well, some of the best of the best, and can actually say, no, Roberto, you're wrong, please stop. But we're finding stuff like this. For example, this, there's like what appears to be a Renaissance motif of a head, you know, with the foliage coming out. And I've started comparing it, for example, with some of the books printed in Mexico in the 1570s, 80s, with this form of Renaissance art. So we start seeing that over there, they're adopting some things, and we're seeing that in Mexico, we're adopting other things, and then is where the story gets really, really, really interesting. Or for example, a fragment with one of the 18 mortals, you know, and just makes you wonder, what would a consumer in Mexico City think of this piece? He would, of course, not know that he was looking at one of the 18 mortals. But this is, again, like a love relationship, you know? When you fall in love, doesn't matter, you're just in love, you know? You just, all right? But it's kind of very interesting. Or for example, this piece, this is one that I really love, because this is a porcelain that depicts the monogram of Ferdinand VIII, the last king that ruled over New Spain, Mexico. and he ruled in 1808. Napoleon came, he was out, and then he managed to return in 1813. So this shard must have been commissioned in 1808 all the way to China to be produced to celebrate the rise of the new king. But when the piece got to Mexico, he was no longer the king. So they probably just discarded it and said, oh my God, now we gotta make a new one for someone else. And then, well, he became king again. But so we are starting to find all these little histories, all these little things that make a mosaic of the times of the Manila Galleon, right? And this is probably one of my favorites up to now. This Ming bowl, of course, this is an early piece. And there are some similar pieces around the world, not many, but depicts something very beautiful. It depicts the Lanting, the orchid pavilion. And this, thanks to a good friend, Etsuko Miyata, I give her the credit. She's the one that pointed me in this direction really fast. So this is the Lanting, and this is a very classic Chinese poem represented in porcelain. It has been represented in paintings, it has been represented in all kinds of manners during the Ming, when they're kind of rescuing a lot of the very old traditions. So this poem was written in the 4th century, okay? The Orchid Pavilion, in the 4th century. It was calligraphed by one of the outmost Chinese calligraphers of all time. No? So you got a beautiful poem that was written by the greatest calligrapher probably in China. And it tells that in the year 353, during the Jin dynasty, the great Chinese poet and calligrapher Wang Qixi gathered with other literati at the Orchid Pavilion to celebrate the spring purification ritual. They wrote 37 poems, and one wrote Lanting Shu as a preface to the work. He's China's most admired calligrapher. But this is actually very cool because they would gather around the river and they would put little cups with alcohol along the river, and if the cup arrived near you, you had to drink it. So they were drinking, basically. These guys were getting wasted and drunk, and they had to write a poem. And so they gather all these poems, and he writes this preface. The story was represented after more than 1,000 years in a bowl of blue and white porcelain manufactured in Jin at the end of the Ming dynasty. It made its way to the coast of China and embarked to Manila, from where it traveled in the Manila Galleon to the port of Acapulco. During excavations in 2016 at downtown Acapulco, archaeologists uncovered a fragment among thousands of Chinese porcelains, and all these questions arose. How did that poem travel through time and space and become a shard of porcelain found in Acapulco, today exhibited in the Asian Civilization Museum? That would have meant a lot to people in China, in the Philippines perhaps, but in New Spain and beyond, material culture approaches can help in making the biography of this. But I really want to finish just with what this man wrote 1,000 years ago. On this late spring day, the 9th year of Junco, we gathered at the Orchid Pavilion in Shaoxing to observe the spring purification ritual festival. All of the prominent people were there, from old to young. How high mountains and luxuriant bamboo groves lie in the back. A limpid, swift stream gurgles around, which reflected the sunlight as it flowed past either side of the pavilion. We sat by the water, sharing wine from a floating goblet while chanting poems, which gave us delight in spite of the absence of musical accompaniment. This is a sunny day with a gentle valley breeze. Spreading before the eye is the beauty of nature, and hanging high in the immeasurable universe. This is perfect for an inspired mind. What enjoyment. It says, I am often moved by the ancient sentimental lines which lamented the swiftness and uncertainty of life. When future generations look back to my time, it will probably be similar to how I now think of the past. What a shame. Therefore, when I list out the people that were here and their musings, even though times and circumstances will change, as for the things that we regret, they are the same. For the people who read future generations, perhaps you will likewise be moved by my words. So it just became a trip to find this very old poem depicted in a Ming porcelain shard that reflects upon the passing of time. Wow, So I'm still processing it in a philosophical way, and we'll definitely put the results in the catalog. And well, thank you very much for your time. Any questions? I'm at your disposal.
Thank you, Dr. Roberto. We will just wait for the seats to be prepared and we will be able to start the discussions. So, ladies and gentlemen, please feel free to ask questions about the presentation. I think before we start the discussion, I think this is a very good example of what maritime archaeology is all about. It's not just about diving, it's not just about shipwrecks, but it's also to talk about the maritime activities and how do people interact with their maritime environment. So I think that's covered really heavily in the presentation, where you can see that there are terrestrial sites that actually exhibited the maritime connections, maritime trade, and even from the previous presentation by Dr. Iván talking about shipbuilding, they all constitute what we understand as maritime archaeology. So without further ado, again, are there any questions from the floor with regards to Dr. Roberto's presentation? Yes, that gentleman over there.
You mentioned smuggling. How could there be any smuggling in a trade that goes over more than 1,000 miles? And how important was it? Do we have any idea?
Well, you know, like smuggling is very difficult to quantify, even today, any time, you know, because it's illegal, of course. But of course, we know that there was a lot of, all the ships were carrying more than they should, more than their fair share, more than was authorized by the Crown. It is very difficult to find archaeologically smuggling activities. Nonetheless, it's easier than with the documents. So remember that the galleon would travel up north to get the Kurosibo current and more or less arrive in the altitude of San Francisco and then head through the coastal navigation, through the Baja California Peninsula and then the territory of New Spain. So they had the opportunity because people after 6 months in the ship, the coming back of the ship was very long. Everybody wanted to get down a little bit and to have fresh fruit, of course, or imagine all the sicknesses and everything. So they would make these stops. And along these stops, of course, they took the advantage to unload boxes, things. So I guess everybody in the ship had something to gain, and they just went along with that. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Considerable leakage.
Yeah, of course.
On the way, and the kingdom did not control everything.
See, I don't know. Maybe it's like a Latin thing that, but it was current and all throughout the Manila Galleon.
Okay, I think the gentleman right in the middle, and then right next to him. No, right in the middle and the third row. The third row. Oh, the first row? Oh, okay, sorry.
I'm just curious if the auctions in Acapulco were controlled. They're controlled by the Crown. And all ships, or all the galleons, were expected to ultimately reach Acapulco. This, of course, there was the offloading from time to time, but the tax, was it taxed? How was it managed?
Well, once the ship came into the anchoring site in Acapulco, then an official of the Crown, he would go through all the merchandise and just record everything and charge a percentage for the Crown. And this money sometimes was used to pay for the operations in Acapulco itself or back for the operations in Manila. So it worked like that. There was a civil servant that would actually go and check out every single one of these boxes. Of course, he also maybe sometimes let go a few things, no? But that was the process. Sí, yes. So there was an authority that would go and check the manifestos.
Thank you for the question.
Yes,
Next.
as an observation, there are two items that are very important: the wax and also the pottery that is not so elegant. And it's very interesting because the galleon is, of course, high-end products, but at the same time, material, utilitarian merchandise that were important in the galleon. I understand the pottery made of clay, the one that you force somebody to sell, is interesting because it's exactly the same way as the martaban in Burma. And you can find in places, remote towns in Michoacán, in which the people still call it martaban to these kind of containers to receive the rain.
Yes, absolutely. It's not all luxury products, it's also daily life of the people on board that is represented in the archaeological context.
I have two comments. Martaban is Chinese stoneware, so it's made in China and shipped all the way around. It's a misnomer. It has nothing to do with martaban. And this was documented, Dr. Iván can do this better than me, but documented in the lowest levels of the galleon. And then porcelain comes on top, and then the finer goods on top. Porcelain is actually quite a cheap commodity in the overall economics of the galleon. I'm sorry, Bill. But relatively inexpensive commodity. The idea of state corruption is also very important. And here I'm just quoting a couple of recent dissertations. The galleon trade was enormously full of leaks along the way, and this was fully acknowledged. By 1620, there are two different taxation systems for legal merchandise and quasi-legal merchandise. So they're actually trying to capture a tax on the smuggled objects that was so bad. And then there was, of course, the genuinely smuggled objects, which were completely untaxed. And I think we cannot judge this in terms of legality or smuggling, nor is it completely Latino. This was part of the system of the 17th and 18th century. There were just levels of state control. And so we have to shift our mentality about the issue of smuggling. What's very interesting is that we're sitting here because we represent art forms that are completely undocumented, like ivories, and they're only documented when they're lost and people need to file an insurance claim, and lacquer, which is undocumented. The missions didn't declare or pay tax; they were exempt, and a lot of the state officials found a way of not paying tax or declaring their goods. So there's a lot of what I would call state-sponsored smuggling. So it's a complicated situation, and there's a very long dissertation about this.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you're right. I mean, textiles were really more important than porcelain. Textiles were the main thing. But archaeologically, it's very difficult for them to survive.
Yeah, I think we are almost reaching to the end of the discussion. I'm so sorry. Perhaps you can actually address the question to Roberto during lunchtime. Yeah, so we would like to kindly move on to the next speaker, Mr. Bobby. Yeah, so let me introduce him first. And thank you, Roberto, for that wonderful sharing and the discussion. So introducing Bobby plays a very kind of intimate part of myself because of the fact that he was my teacher, teaching me maritime archaeology in 2016. So I'm really honored and glad that I'm able to be the moderator for him. Allow me to introduce him first. He is a curator and officer in charge of the Maritime and Underwater Cultural Heritage Division of the National Museum of the Philippines. He's the former president of the Guild of Archaeologists in the Philippines and is a member of the International Council on Monuments and Sites International Committee on the Underwater Cultural Heritage, ICOMOS ICUCH. He has carried out fieldwork and research in Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, Sri Lanka, and Egypt, including as part of a UNESCO team that conducted underwater archaeological training program that includes me. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to invite Bobby up to the stage to provide his presentation on the archaeology of Manila Galleons in the Philippines. Bobby, please.
Distinguished guests, excellencies, colleagues, fellow speakers, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. That was a very generous introduction, Michael. Thanks very much for that. So, fellow speakers have already laid out fantastically the historical background of the Manila Galleons. So my focus now is on the archaeology of the Manila Galleons in the Philippines. Roberto opened this, so I'm going to continue this love story on the other side of the world. So who's more in love with who? That is the question. So first, before we go into the archaeology, I would like to introduce the office that does conduct terrestrial and underwater archaeology in the Philippines, which is the National Museum of the Philippines, where I work. So it's a government agency that is an education, scientific, and cultural institution that acquires documents, preserves, exhibits, and fosters scholarly study and public appreciation of works of art, specimens, and cultural and historical artifacts representative of the Philippines' unique history and cultural heritage of the Filipino people, and also the natural history of the Philippines. So what you see here is a photo of the National Museum Central Complex in Manila. So it's composed of the National Museum of Fine Arts, which displays contemporary works of art and also works of our masters in the Philippines. And the National Museum of Anthropology, which exhibits the ethnological, anthropological, and archaeological materials. And finally, the National Museum of History, which displays geological, paleontological, zoological, and botanical specimens. And we are very active in terms really of promoting the National Museum to the whole of the country, as you can see from the photos. We have a lot of regional site and area museums, and we're currently building more. This year we'll be building 2 new museums, and in the next years we will be building at least 2 every year. So I'd like to touch on a little bit on the history and development of underwater and maritime archaeology research at the National Museum. So it was first named as the Underwater Archaeology Unit, or UAU, in 1979, after some museum personnel underwent training in underwater archaeology in Thailand, but they were not archaeologists. So and it was under the then Anthropology Division. And then in 1988, it was named the Underwater Archaeology Section, which is a little bit bigger, and then it was under the Archaeology Division. And finally, in 2016, the National Museum underwent a reorganization, which resulted in the creation of the Maritime and Underwater Cultural Heritage Division. So the map that you see is, it shows most of our major surveys and excavations from the 1980s until recently, which includes some sites from the prehistoric period. We did an underwater excavation of an underwater cave dated to 20,000 years ago until World War II. So I'd like to share to you some relevant facts about the Manila Galleons. So more than 140 galleons or vessels traveled the Manila Galleon Acapulco route from 1565 to 1815. Of these, 108 galleons were owned by the Spanish colonial government. So from 1565 to approximately 1600, as many as 4 galleons traveled in tandem from Manila to Acapulco. This ended when the new regulations were established by the Spanish government in 1593, restricting the trade to 2 vessels per year, one from Acapulco and the other from Manila. There were years that no galleon crossed the Manila-Acapulco route. 26 vessels were lost due to either severe storms, fires on the ships, pilot error, or the vessel's lack of seaworthiness as a result of poor condition. Finally, 4 of the galleons were captured by the British pirates or privateers, and include Santa Ana in 1587, Encarnacion in 1709, Nuestra Señora de Covadonga in 1743, and the Nuestra Señora de Santissima Trinidad in 1762. So this is the trade of the Manila Galleon within the Philippines. So it starts in Manila or Cavite, and then goes south to Batangas, and then past between Batangas and Mindoro, and then again past Marinduque, and then goes south east towards Ticao Island before proceeding to the Embocadero or San Bernardino Straits, going out to the Pacific, going north, catch the Crucio current before going to the Americas. And this is quite relevant also to the question of smuggling that was posed earlier. So there were historical documents that say the list that is in Cavite will not be the list that as the galleons go out in San Bernardino. So there's some low-level trading in between. So normally it doesn't take 1 month. So because of the low-laden trade and maybe smuggling a little bit, so it takes a month. So this is a list of lost Manila galleons that are not investigated or currently being investigated. So there were 2 unidentified ships in Cavite port. It was lost in 1589. And there's also the Santa Maria de Magdalena, which was lost in 1589 in Cavite port. There's the San Luis, lost in 1646 in Cagayan in the north. There was actually a project that tried to discover this, to search for this way back many years ago, but the environment conditions, the water conditions were so bad that they couldn't really finish the survey. So there's the Buen Jesus, location Binangonan de Lampon, which is presently in Infanta, Quezon. It was lost in 1648. And the Nuestra Señora de la Encarnación, which is located in Bulan, and lost in 1648. I just got a fund to look for this, and we'll be doing the survey for this later this year. Hopefully we will find it, so we'll have new data on the Manila Galleon. And there's also the Nuestra Señora del Pilar, which was lost in 1750 near Manila. And the San Fernando, which was lost in Sorsogon in 1799. And also the San Francisco Javier, a known location, but it was lost in 1653. And there's a current investigation on the San Andres, which was located in Embocadero in San Bernardino Straits, which was lost in 1798. A number of years were dedicated to search for this. And they may have located this, but it's in 90 meters of water with very, very strong current, which is very characteristic of the San Bernardino Straits. So it may have been there, but it's very challenging and quite impossible to work on it now. So now let's go to the specific Manila galleons that were investigated by the National Museum of the Philippines. So first one is the Espiritu Santo, lost in 1576, San Jeronimo, lost in 1600, and Santo Tomas, lost in 1601. So Espiritu Santo was an outbound Manila galleon that sank in the vicinity of Catanduanes, as you will see from on the right side, the map of Catanduanes. So there's a historical work by Pastels, in which he provided relevant passages related to the sinking of the Espiritu Santo. He says, the vessel's untimely demise was caused by an unforgettable, strong, and merciless typhoon, and the galleon was suddenly thrown onto the reefs near a place and uncharted coast of the shore of Catanduanes. Another textual source, Agustin Maria de Castro's Osorio Venerable Visionaries Agustin en Extrema Oriente, I hope that you didn't butcher it, from 1565 to 1780 and published in 1954, provide the following relevant cause. On the way, approximately 100 leagues from Manila and along a channel of the island and province of Catanduanes, the Espiritu Santo was wrecked due to the carelessness of the pilot. Furthermore, the friars tried to swim toward south of Catanduanes. So, the interrupted voyage of the San Jeronimo was mentioned in only one historical source, Colin and Murillo's Labor Evangelica, published in 1749. In chapter 17, pages 705 to 707 of the second volume, it states that the San Jeronimo was lost on the way to New Spain, and that it perished just outside of the Embocadero in Catanduanes Island near Virac Point. So we spent many years trying to look for the three Manila Galleons from 1998 until 2002. And we mostly use these vessels. So we have a bigger vessel, the one on your top left. And we also used for the deep water survey, and we used the smaller vessel there for the shallow survey. And we mostly used multi-beam sonars, the one with the yellow color, and also magnetometers, the one with the orange color. So this is a result of the survey, many years of survey, mostly along the east side and south side of Catanduanes. The colored ones are the results of the multi-beam sonar, while the gray ones, especially to the south, are the result of magnetometer surveys. However, despite the many years of looking for it, this is the only evidence that we have. And I found it while walking on the beach on my free time. So as you can see, those ceramics, I also study ceramics, so I can identify a lot of ceramics. So these are mostly from the late 15th century, and which mostly corresponds to the San Jeronimo. And there's also like supported by historical documents. So after I found this, we spent many, many days looking around the area, the one that you see in the photo, but we didn't find anything after that. We found anchor, but it's a very new anchor. So next is the Nuestra Señora de la Vida. It's a Spanish galleon that reportedly crashed into the reef, into the southwest coast of Verde Island. That's Verde Island right there, as it was sailing to the San Bernardino Straits towards Acapulco. The passengers of the ship were reportedly so angry that they executed the chief pilot by hanging him on the shore. That's really upset. So the ship structure was severely damaged, and its contents were reportedly recovered a year earlier. So that's what we found as the material remains, especially the hull remains of the De La Vida. So the timber measured 21 meters long and located between 4 and 6 meters deep. The keel is placed in the position by two huge blocks above it. The larger block is mainly composed of ballast stones, together with coral concretions, and the smaller block consists of several cannonballs surrounded by coating of iron and limestone aggregate and joined together with ballast stones. The keelson and two counter keels have left traces under the two blocks composed of ballast stones and cannon stones. So, well, you can see the photo mosaic of the entire site. So that's what remains of the De La Vida. There was a rudder, actually, which I couldn't find any primary photo, that they transferred because the investigators think that it's under threat. So they transferred it to another place in Puerto Galera in Mindoro, which is now a very popular tourist site, just to preserve it. But I think what they didn't count on was the influx of tourists and dive tourism in that area. So when they tried to relocate it later, I mean just recently, a few years back, they couldn't find it. So there were some recoveries, primarily Chinese ceramics. So the Chinese blue and white fragments were analyzed and identified to be blue and white crackwares produced in Jinlijian and Jiangzhou provinces during the early 17th century. However, it was described as inferior quality and maybe destined for a less selective clientele, quite possibly for the general population. Next, we go to the San Diego. So the San Diego is Spanish naos, or a merchant vessel, converted into a warship that sank off the waters of Nasugbu, Batangas province, during the naval engagement of the Dutch ship Mauritius. It's in here. So it's really just off Fortune Island, a very small island off Batangas. So San Diego was built in the shipyards of Cebu as a merchant ship and was initially named San Antonio. She was docked in Cavite for reconditioning and repairs when a couple of Dutch ships, led by Olivier van Noort, aboard his flagship Mauritius and a smaller ship Concord, entered Philippine waters to carry out private trade in the country. So when the Spanish learned of this incursion, the government hastily assembled a small fleet of ships, including San Diego as the flagship, to pursue and engage the Dutch. Don Antonio de Morga, as you can see his photo right there, at the time was the Vice Governor General of the Philippines. He was also the head of the Inquisition and a judge of the Royal Audiencia. He was tasked to lead the investigation. He may be a fantastic administrator, but he is a bad sailor. He has no experience in nautical matters. So, because of this, de Morga loaded San Diego with weaponries, including land cannons and other unnecessary cargo. So this made the San Diego too heavy for maneuvers, which was an essential factor for the naval engagements. So after a brief skirmish at Friar Point, Mauritius and San Diego had a running battle that finally culminated in a fierce, close encounter near Fortune Island. So de Morga's bad tactical decisions and the unsuitability of San Diego for warfare caused it to sink when hit by cannonballs, as you can see from the illustrations right there. San Bartolome, San Diego's escort vessel, captured the Concord in Lubang Island near Mindoro Island, while the Mauritius escaped to Indonesia before returning to Rotterdam. So archival research on the possible location of the site was conducted in the libraries and archives of Spain, Holland, Italy, and France. The primary historical peer used include Don Antonio de Morga's Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas, or Historical Events in the Philippine Islands, which was published in Mexico in 1609, and Olivier Van Noort's My Arduous Journey Around the World, and other sources that mention the battle between the two ships. So this was the survey in 1992 that was conducted. So they did a magnetometer survey during that time. So they established a DGPS point system before they went with the magnetometer survey. So due to the historical inaccuracies, because de Morga wanted to portray himself as the hero. So he said he swam this number of hours before reaching to shore. So that was the basis for the survey. And it turned out to be inaccurate. So it was found 200 meters, just the nearest Fortune Island. So these are the snapshots of the excavation of the San Diego. It was quite deep, at least 54 meters. So at that time, the National Museum was not really involved in the actual excavation, but they did supervise the excavation using a submersible, which you can see on the left side of your screen. So the other photo shows the excavation of the hull of the San Diego. So for any archaeologist, this is a very basic stuff for us. Context is king. So we have to record everything so that we can interpret it later. And one of these things is composed of the layout, of illustrations of layout, especially during that time. It was 1992. So based on the manual recording of the vessel, it was estimated to be 35 to 40 meters long and 11 to 12 meters wide, with a 700 to 800 ton capacity and with a displacement of almost 1,000 tons, making it an ocean-going vessel. I think technically, we cannot really classify San Diego as a Manila Galleon because there are no historical documents that state that it is a Manila Galleon. There was one mention that it plied the local route, but not the Acapulco route. So there's an inconsistency in that. So after the manual recording, it was made a digital reconstruction of the San Diego by naval architect Philippe Thomé. And then there's a model of the galleon in the San Diego exhibit, which was at the National Museum of Anthropology, but it's now transferred to Cebu. So again, some snapshots of the excavation. The anchor is there, lots and lots of stoneware jars, and also the land cannons. And some of the more fantastic recoveries were sort of crack wares. These are Chinese ceramics produced during the reign of Chinese Emperor Wanli in 1573 to 1620. So these are very characteristic of crack wares, except the one in the middle up. which is not really kraak but swatao or zhangjiao ware. So I think Roberto mentioned many kraak wares in his presentation, so I will not elaborate on this further. Again, many kraak wares which are similar to Roberto's in Mexico. Kraak wares are mostly foliated, meaning round-rimmed, and also with panels, as you can see, and with various decorations on the panels and also in the central portion, which mostly consist of deers, landscape, floral, and even aquatic themes. And these are also some of the 800 intact jars that were found at San Diego. The one on the upper left side are the dragon jars, which are produced in Fujian kilns in South China. The one beneath it are actually Thai jars, which are produced in the Mainamnoi kilns in Singburi province. The one in the middle are called olive jars, which may have been made in Mexico. And then the one on the upper right are Chinese jars, which are technically termed luted jars, because two parts were luted into one. And the one on the lower that is the technical martaban jars. In the past, it's generally, almost all of the large stoneware jars are called martaban, right? So it's been misidentified, but these are actually the real martaban jars. So it's produced in a certain section in Myanmar. So these are also some of the materials that were recovered from San Diego. And there's a lot. There's earthenware, pottery, stove and pots. And there's also a terracotta with porcelain inlay. Which is really interesting because we really don't know where they come from. Some say it could be Mexican, some say it could be in the Philippines, but we haven't really identified the specific kilns for this. And metalwares, lots of metalwares, silver, and religious items and glass items. And the last two are nautical items, such as the astrolabe, which is quite rare. There's only a few of them, less than 100 now. And also a concentric ring, which until now we don't know, but we know it's a nautical instrument, but we don't know its real exact purpose. So now we go to the San Jose. So the San Jose was the biggest Spanish galleon during its time, with a length of 60 meters. She was reportedly sunk during a storm somewhere in the shores of west side of Lubang Island in Mindoro. So let's see here. And the picture there is actually that specific bay where the San Jose was sunk. So it sank there on the 3rd of July, 1694. So it is said that the ship's three masts and rudder supposedly broke as the ship hit the reef, causing severe damage to its structure. It was estimated that the wreckage was scattered over a large area, possibly 1 square kilometer, but the main area may be approximated to be contained in a 300 square meter area. So it took only 90 months to construct the San Jose as the shipyard in Cavite. The shipbuilders worked round the clock during her construction and working even during religious holidays. That when she was wrecked, the clergy immediately attributed the disrespect to the church having caused the disaster. So unfortunately, all 400 people on board perished along with 12,000 pieces of cargo. So excavations were done in the 90s. As you can see here, there's also ship remains, and then lots and lots of these Kangxi blue and white teacups, thousands and thousands of them. So a few years back, before the pandemic, a team from the National Museum went back there to do a resurvey of the site using that small sub-bottom profiler. They tested it because it's new. It's a sort of a prototype. So they wanted to use it in a shallow area to see how effective it is. And as you can see from the illustrations there, it was quite effective. They found some specimens in the area here. So these are the snapshots of the investigations, actual investigations. And these were some of the materials that were recovered from the survey. So there's, again, examples of teacups, but there's also very small snuff bottles, which is quite cute. And some were embedded in iron concretions. So lastly, we go to the Santo Cristo de Burgos, which was wrecked in 1726. It was an outbound Manila Galleon that sailed from Cavite on the 8th of July, 1726. She moored on the southeast coast of Ticao Island, that one there, between Sorsogon and Masbate while waiting for favorable winds, when a sudden storm pushed the ship into the shallow reefs that caused its destruction on the 23rd of July in 1726. So the ship reportedly sunk with its stern and on the shallow area and the bow facing the Ticao Pass. So the vessel was one of the biggest during its time, weighing approximately 4,000 tons and carried 52 bronze and iron cannons. At the time of its sinking, she was fully laden with cargoes destined for Acapulco that may have included spices, marine and forest products, silk, and porcelain, among others. So the National Museum worked with a private group on this and carried out bathymetric and magnetometer survey from April to May 2004. So again, snapshots of the survey, which is establishing a DGPS during the time, and then deploying the magnetometers, and also using metal detectors for anomalies that were detected during the survey. So it was this area in Ticao that they made the survey, specific survey. So despite the very thorough investigation, the ship itself or the main cargo has not been found because of, I think primarily it's very shallow, and most of the time the water environment in that area is quite active. So it is possible that the ship and its contents may have thoroughly salvaged because it's also near the shore, and it was also located in shallow waters. So that's all there is, small pieces of metal, porcelain, and concretions. So as a summary, the arrival of the European naval expeditions in Southeast Asia during the early 16th century CE created profound transformations in patterns of Southeast Asian maritime trade as European markets became available to Chinese and Southeast Asian products and vice versa. In effect, Manila became the commercial center of the world in the 16th and 17th centuries due to primarily the galleon trade that linked the trading commodities of the East and West, the love story part, right? And the National Museum has been involved with the search of the Manila Galleon since 1985 and has fully investigated 6 shipwrecks at this time. So, although there have been several surveys and excavations, only San Diego, as you have seen, yielded a complete archaeological assemblage. So, the Manila Galleons were the primary material evidence of the first instance of globalization using the maritime highways and of Manila playing a crucial role in economic affairs. Finally, I would like to thank Asian Civilisations Museum for mounting these exhibitions, because this story is not only with the Americas and Manila, but it's a shared heritage of which Southeast Asians and Latin America and even Spain can participate in. So you've opened a Pandora's box, but in a good way. So opening up a lot of questions, pursuing a lot of possible research avenues. So thank you very much. And thank you, Roberto, for taking all the questions.
Okay, thank you, Bobby, for that wonderful presentation on maritime archaeology in the Philippines, specifically on the San Diego. So, audiences, maybe you can start thinking of questions, preparing your questions for Bobby to answer about the maritime archaeology in the Philippines. Okay, I see that there's already a very quick question there.
Hello and thank you. I've been so curious about how these vessels travel And I'd like you to describe a little about how they traveled north, caught the current, whichever currents and winds and so forth, and how they ended up in Acapulco. Could you do that, please?
I'll try, but it may not be accurate. So, from Cavite, of course, everyone is there, all the crews, the passengers, and the officers, and then the cargo itself, right, from Cavite or Manila. And then they slowly went down south, and there are historical documents that say that there's a way there in Marinduque that they also do stops for reprovisioning and also do a little bit of low-scale trading. So it could mean anything. So, but there's an exchange of merchandise and goods. And after Marinduque, they also go slowly towards Ticao Island and may have passed Masbate also. Masbate is also a big island that is supposed to be, again, a site of some illicit low-level smuggling. And then again in Ticao, which was the last stop, and there's considerable smuggling there, and because it's the last preparation before you go out to the Pacific. So once you get out of Ticao, you go to the San Bernardino Straits, and the San Bernardino Straits is a very dangerous passage. And I've been there many times, and you can really see some whirlpools in some areas. So once you get to the north, and depends if the weather is okay, then you can go north towards Catanduanes. And if you get caught with storms, then there's a very big problem. So that's why there's a lot of storms, a lot of shipwrecks in Catanduanes. And then you slowly trudge north again, and until you get the Kuroshio current in Japan, which was mentioned earlier, and then ride on it until the San Francisco thing, and then when you reach the California, again, as Roberto said, there's some low-level trading, especially after 4 months at least of crossing, especially for the Tornaviaje, the return trip. On the way back, it's easier. It takes like maybe 2 or 3 months because it's favorable winds and favorable currents. So it's just pretty much straight. So, but in the meantime, if the travel is very difficult and there will be lots of death because of scurvy and because of other ailments during the travel. So it's not an easy voyage to make, but it's a necessary one. That's why people are taking it. The lure of riches, has made a lot of people do the unimaginable at that time. So the travel, if successful, would be very, very productive for the people involved, especially in Manila, who actually depends on the profit generated from the inbound Manila Galleon carrying the silver, which is necessary for as a subsidy for the government in Spanish Manila, and also as an exchange for the Chinese materials, from the Japanese materials, from Southeast Asia. So yes.
Hey, thank you for the question. Anybody else with another question? Yep, that gentleman in the middle.
Thank you. I am Justice Carpio. In the map of Father Pedro Murillo Velarde of 1794, there is a route of the Manila Galleon. It enters to San Bernardino Strait, goes to Masbate and Mindoro, and then Manila Bay, and then it goes out on the return trip to the tip of northern Luzon, and the last stop is Fuga Island before they cross the Pacific. Has that route been used, or it's just propaganda for by the Spaniards at the time to mislead the British?
There was actually 2 years, I think, that they used that route, but it wasn't as profitable as the one down south. So they discontinued it because I think there's no smuggling there, and the route is a bit challenging because there's not many places that you can safely anchor when you go north from Manila.
Any further questions?
And as a
sorry.
rejoinder, that's why there was a San Luis shipwreck up in the north. That one was part of who used the northern part.
Okay, the lady over there.
Thank you. Given the extraordinarily dangerous nature of these outbound voyages, could you tell us something about the religious provisions that were made for the people on the ships?
Oh, I'm afraid I don't know much about the religious provisions. We excavated some rosaries in the San Diego, but we haven't really had any archaeological evidence to really interpret on religion. But I'm sure there are, because there are missionaries. It's just not reflected in the archaeological record.
Okay, the gentleman in the middle.
Thank you. It's an extension of the question just now with regard to religion. Talking about the sailors on the Manila Galleon trade, would it be purely Spanish, purely Philippines, or actually it's a mixture of different people of different regions? Because we always say Manila Galleon, we'll assume that it will be either half Philippines or half Spanish, or actually it's a mix of different sailors from different regions. You will have Chinese or Japanese and etc. Thank you.
Exactly, it's a mixture. In the San Diego shipwreck, we found katanas. So, because it's been historically documented that the Japanese mercenaries were used during the Manila Galleon trade. And most of the crew were mostly Filipinos. But there are also Spanish from the Philippines that goes back to Mexico. So it's a mixture really of ethnicities, not contained with Spanish, with Filipinos, and with Japanese, but I think there are other ethnicities.
Thank you.
I'm not sure, but it could be a mixture of Spanish and also Philippine language. Maybe.
Yeah, speaking of from the perspective of a linguist, that's how languages actually come about, with a lot of interactions of languages. And in the end, what happens is primary languages gets a little bit assimilated with borrowing of vocabulary. So borrowings are actually very common. In most of our Southeast Asian languages, there's really a huge amount of borrowings that we can actually observe. And a lot of them could actually be traced to the trade that actually happened at that time. Yeah. We can afford for one short question. One short one. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Joseph Gan here. I understand that the voyages can be very long, like 4 months and so on. I wonder how they solve the water problem.
I'm sorry?
The water problem.
The drinking water. It's from the rain. So that's why they have, a lot of galleons have very huge stoneware jars. That's primarily for water. And they also catch rain while on travel. So that's why when you have storms, then you have a lot of water, but then it could be a very dangerous also voyage. But mostly they have, and they reprovision it before they leave the Philippines in Ticao Island. They fill it with water. And there's historical and archaeological documents in Ticao that they have really deep water wells in some areas. And it's just a research done by a master student in the Philippines recently.
Yeah, I do understand that some of the voyages that are so long that they have no lands, right? So it's all the way is 4 months of sea travel. And without rain, I wonder how they survive.
I don't think there's bound to be winds. Maybe in some areas, so they couldn't really advance as fast as they like. But then there are other types of weather that can push really the seas, the vessels towards the destination. But there are also instances, that's why there are shipwrecks in Saipan. There are shipwrecks in Japan. It's because of the weather conditions that's pushing them to other directions than the one they want to.
Okay, we would like to end the session here. I'd like to thank all the speakers, including Bobby, Dr. Junco, as well as Dr. Iván, for their wonderful sharing of maritime archaeology about the Manila Galleons. Thank you for being such wonderful audience, very insightful questions, and last but not least, Lo siento for my horrible butchering of the Spanish language. So now we can proceed for lunch, for some nourishments for the next session. Thank you, everyone.